The Arctic wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of Outpost Vega, a remote research station perched on the edge of an endless white abyss. Inside, Dr. Lucas Hensley hunched over a flickering monitor, rubbing exhaustion from his eyes. The drone had picked up something strange. At first, it looked like a shadow cast by the jagged ice, or maybe a collapsed snowdrift. But then it moved. "Lucas, you're gonna want to see this," Callie's voice crackled through the radio. "It's alive." Lucas pushed away from the desk and sprinted down the metal corridor to the control room, where Callie and two other researchers, Wyatt and Torres, were glued to the drone's live feed. On the screen was a massive hulking shape, barely distinguishable against the ice. It was an Arctic musk ox, one of the last of its kind in these parts, but this one wasn't grazing or moving with any normal purpose. It was frozen in place, shifting only slightly, as if something unseen held it there. Wyatt adjusted the thermal settings. "Jesus," he whispered. The screen flared red hot. Despite the sub-zero temperatures, the musk ox was burning up from the inside. Lucas didn't hesitate. "Get the gear ready, we're going out." The snowmobile ride was brutal. Ice-crusted wind whipped at their exposed skin, and the Arctic stretched on forever in every direction. A graveyard of forgotten things. Lucas drove, teeth clenched, following the GPS markers. Then they saw it. The musk ox stood motionless, its thick fur crusted with ice, its legs trembling under its own weight. But the closer they got, the more they saw the true horror. The animal's entire body was covered in grotesque barnacle-like growths, thick, blackened shells with oozing honeycomb-like wounds underneath. Some of them moved, writhing. The fur had matted into stiff, frozen clumps. Callie gasped. "It's not just sick, it's being eaten alive." Lucas stepped closer, heart pounding. The musk ox lifted its head, its milky eyes clouded with fever. It tried to step forward, but something clung to its legs. A deep, wet tearing sound filled the air as barnacles pulled at its flesh. It let out a long, ragged moan of pain. Wyatt swore under his breath. "This thing should be dead." Lucas's hand hovered over his tranquilizer gun. He had seen parasite infestations before, but nothing like this. The wounds looked unnatural, almost intelligent, as if something had arranged them deliberately. The muskox made a sudden, violent movement. It wasn't an attack, it was pleading, it was begging, and that was what sealed Lucas's decision. "We can't leave it here," he said. "We're bringing it back." Torres and Wyatt moved in with the stretcher sled, careful not to touch the pulsating barnacles. The muskox didn't resist. It was weak, its body shaking violently as if it was using the last of its strength to surrender. As they worked, Callie's radio crackled. "Hold up," she whispered. "Something's wrong." She had the drone circling overhead, its infrared sensors tracking something moving beneath the ice. Not a single thing, multiple things. The drone's camera feed jittered. The thermal signatures weren't human. Torres cursed. "You're telling me these things are underground?" Before Lucas could answer, a deep, low vibration rumbled beneath their feet. The ice shuddered. Lucas looked down and saw a hairline crack forming beneath the musk ox's hooves. Something was waking up. "Move! Now!" he shouted. They hauled the musk ox onto the sled and revved the snowmobiles to full throttle, speeding across the ice just as the crack splintered outward. A black, writhing mass swirled beneath the ice sheet, just inches from breaking the surface. They didn't stop. They didn't look back. But even as the rescue team reached the outpost, as they sealed the doors behind them and set to work saving the creature, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they had brought something back with them. Something that wasn't just the musk ox, something that wanted to get inside. The storm battered Outpost Vega, rattling the metal walls like a living thing. Inside, the research team worked frantically, their gloves slick with sweat and blood as they tried to save the musk ox from whatever horrors had taken hold of its body. Lucas stood at the operating table, heart hammering in his chest. The musk ox lay barely breathing, its massive body spasming in irregular jolts. The parasite-infested fur rose and fell like a corpse on a ventilator. Callie and Torres had set up floodlights to get a better look at the barnacles. They weren't just clusters of hardened shell, they were moving. They twitched when touched, They contracted in unison, like muscle fibers reacting to a nerve impulse. Wyatt hovered over the X-ray machine, his expression twisted into something between awe and horror. "This," he whispered, "this isn't just an infestation, it's a takeover." The screen displayed not just external growths, but deep-rooted spires of the parasite sinking into the musk ox's spinal column, its ribs, even its skull. Lucas wiped sweat from his brow. "We have to start removing them. Now." Torres hesitated. "What if we just put it down?" The room fell silent. Lucas clenched his jaw. "It's still fighting, and as long as it's fighting, we fight too." Wyatt swallowed, gripping a scalpel. "Then, let's get started." The first incision into the musk ox's flesh should have been normal, but the moment Lucas cut, something pulled back. The barnacles reacted. The open wound shrank, closing itself slightly, as if trying to resist being cut away. "What the hell?" Torres whispered. Lucas worked faster, cutting out one of the thickest growths. It snapped free with a wet, tearing noise, revealing something writhing inside. It looked like a bundle of black filaments, tangled and twitching, alive. Then it moved. The mass of tendrils crawled up Lucas's glove, fast. Lucas ripped his hand away, throwing the thing into a containment jar. It thrashed violently against the glass. "Oh my God," Callie whispered. "It's aware." Wyatt grabbed the biohazard tongs and pulled out another parasite-covered barnacle. This one split open as it was removed, spilling out more of the same twitching filaments. "This isn't just an infection," Lucas breathed. "It's something else. It's using the musk ox." Callie turned pale. "For what?" Wyatt examined the barnacle closer, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of the surgical lights. "These parasites, they're not just growing, they're communicating." He turned up the sensitivity on the ultrasound scanner, and suddenly, the screen was filled with pulses of rhythmic energy. A pattern, a signal. The parasites were sending messages to each other. Lucas' stomach twisted. "You're telling me these things are talking?" "They're operating like a single entity, a hive, and..." Wyatt's face drained of color. "They're adapting." Lucas looked down at the muskox. It's breathing more erratic now, almost panicked. It knew. It understood. And that's when the power went out. The lights died instantly, plunging them into darkness. The howling Arctic wind outside grew louder, rattling the station's walls. The emergency backup lights flickered on, casting eerie red shadows over the lab. Lucas grabbed his radio. "Base! We just lost power. What the hell is happening?" Static. A deep clicking noise echoed through the room. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the musk ox. It was clicking back. The barnacles twitched violently. The musk ox's head snapped up. Torres stepped back, eyes wide with horror. It was faking. Before anyone could react, the musk ox lunged forward, snapping the restraints. The parasite was in control now, and it had learned enough. Lucas barely had time to shout before the musk ox thrashed wildly, overturning the operating table. Metal trays and surgical instruments clattered to the floor. The barnacle growths pulsed aggressively, their tendrils writhing like an exposed nerve. Wyatt lunged for the tranquilizer gun. Too late. The musk ox charged, slamming him into the supply cabinet. A sickening crack filled the room, his ribs breaking. Callie screamed. Lucas grabbed a fire extinguisher and swung it with everything he had. It collided with the musk ox's side, momentarily staggering it. "Move! Get out!" Lucas roared. Torres dragged Wyatt toward the exit as the musk ox's body convulsed violently, the barnacles erupting open. Black, writhing tendrils spilled out of the wounds like living veins, reaching for anything nearby. Lucas grabbed Callie and sprinted through the lab door, slamming it shut behind them. They bolted the lock. For a moment, there was silence. Then a deep, unnatural clicking sound came from the other side. The muskox wasn't trying to break out. It was signaling. Callie's voice trembled. Signaling to what? Lucas turned to the observation window. The storm outside had stopped. The ice was shifting. Something else was out there, something that had been waiting. The station's emergency lights flickered, painting the hallway in harsh streaks of red. The rhythmic clicking continued from behind the sealed lab door. Lucas, Callie, and Torres stood frozen. Wyatt was injured, the muskox was infected, and something was waiting outside. Torres pressed his back against the wall, gripping his side where Wyatt's body had slammed into him during the chaos. "Tell me we're not trapped in here with that thing." Lucas ignored him, his mind racing. The parasite had been sending signals. That meant there was something else nearby, something listening. Callie moved to the window, gripping the frost-lined glass. Her breath hitched. "Guys, look." Outside, the snow wasn't falling anymore. It was shifting. The landscape that had once been an empty, frozen wasteland was now alive with movement. Shadows slithered beneath the ice. Large shapes pressed up from beneath, shifting the ground, creating deep cracks that webbed outward like shattered glass. And then, from those cracks, they emerged. At first, they looked like jagged boulders of ice, uneven and wrong. But as they pushed free of the frost, barnacle-covered limbs unfolded. Callie stumbled back from the window. They were under us this whole time. Lucas felt his stomach drop. That thing in there, the Musk ox, it was never the source. It was just a host, a signal tower. Torres' hands trembled. If those things get inside, we're dead. Lucas turned to Wyatt, who was barely conscious against the wall. They needed to escape. Now Lucas grabbed the station's emergency flare gun and tossed it to Torres. "Take this. If anything gets near you, burn it." Callie ran to the supply closet, wrenching it open and pulling out a canister of industrial-strength ethanol. "If we have to, we set this place on fire." Wyatt coughed, struggling to lift his head. "Then what? Freeze to death outside?" Lucas was already moving. We get to the snowmobiles. We run. The sound of twisting metal made them whip around. The door to the lab was buckling inward. A sharp, bony limb, covered in barnacle-like clusters, punched through the steel. Then another. Lucas grabbed Wyatt's arm and slung it over his shoulder. "Go, now!" Torres fired the flare gun at the door. The red-hot burst of flame collided with the limbs, and for a moment, it worked. The creatures shrank back, screeching in unearthly clicks and gurgles. They sprinted down the hall toward the garage doors, throwing open the security locks. Lucas and Callie hauled Wyatt onto a snowmobile, while Torres slammed the release button. The garage doors lurched upward, then the power died completely. Darkness swallowed them. The only sound left was the howling wind. And the clicking. They didn't wait. Lucas gunned the throttle, and the snowmobile lurched forward into the storm. Callie and Torres followed, their headlights cutting beams through the fog. Behind them, the station erupted. The creatures poured out of the broken walls, skittering on too many legs, chitinous shells glistening with frost, their barnacle-covered bodies pulsating with unnatural life. And at the center of them all, the muskox stood, or what remained of it. Its body had split open, its bones rearranging, twisting, as parasitic tendrils unfurled like a grotesque frozen flower. It let out a horrifying, unnatural wail. And then, the things charged. Torres yelled, "They're faster than us!" Lucas's mind raced. They needed a way to slow them down. Then he saw it, a crevasse, a deep, jagged rift in the ice, barely visible through the fog. If they timed it right, they could make the jump. But the creatures, they'd go right into the abyss. Lucas turned back to Callie and Torres. "Trust me, follow my lead." They had no choice. The snowmobiles accelerated. The crevasse was approaching fast. Lucas gritted his teeth. "Hold on, Wyatt!" He hit the edge, launched. The snowmobile soared through the air. For a second, there was nothing but weightlessness, the storm screaming in their ears. Then, impact. Lucas hit the far side, skidding hard on the ice. Callie and Torres landed just behind him. But the creatures? They didn't stop in time. The first wave tumbled over the edge, their inhuman screams fading into the blackness below. The rest skittered to a halt, their barnacle-covered limbs twitching, watching, waiting. The parasitic muskox stood at the edge, its tendril-covered face turning toward them. Then, it slowly stepped backward, disappearing into the shadows below. Lucas didn't wait to see if it would return. "Keep moving." By the time they reached the nearest outpost, Wyatt was in and out of consciousness, and all of them were barely alive from exposure. Lucas reported everything. The muskox, the creatures, the things waiting beneath the ice. No one believed them. Weeks later, a team was sent to investigate. They found the remains of Outpost Vega, frozen and abandoned. No bodies, No signs of life, just a gaping hole in the ice, and in the depths below, a clicking sound, waiting, watching, listening.